Well, welcome to this month's edition of Ball Fields and Blackboards. I don't know, I was thinking the other day, we may have to have a modernization of our title. Maybe skip whiteboards and go straight to ball fields and AI or something. I don't know. And does anybody use a blackboard anymore?
I'm not sure anybody listening might know what a blackboard is.
That's probably right. So it's our age. But
you're assuming somebody's listening.
Yes,
that's very good.
Yes.
Millions out there.
Well, I got Craig and Dennis with me here. Lots of stuff going on. One on the field sort of event that Craig reminded me of. And I'm going to defer to you since this is right down your alley. The Indy 500. It wasn't many years ago that you saw they closed down some of the stands and lots of empty seats. Now the place has filled up again. Seems like the TV viewership is coming back. What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. As somebody who attended Indy 500s for years, started when I was in high school going, took a number of years off. I went back. I was there last year. I was there 3 or 4 years ago, blown away by the crowd size both years that I've been. They were, like you said, down to the point in the early 2000s where they were 2/3 full, and you say 2/3 full, it sounds like it'll still be a lot of people, but that's a lot of empty seats at Indianapolis when you can bring in 350,000 people. But clearly, the unification coming back after they split the series, coming back and having one open car series in the United States has been huge. So they've got name recognition from a lot of drivers now that have been around for a while.
But that still took years
after
the unification before
Yes.
they started really.
Yes.
This does seem like a recent phenomenon. I was more interested in what your take was because I honestly have no idea why there's an interest in the Indy 500 because I don't know. Is there a big interest in the rest of the Indy series?
They have a couple of races that draw physically pretty well in terms of attendance. I think it's the Long Beach, the St. Petersburg Street races still draw pretty well. I think they said the previous week at Indy, they had the Indy road course race, and they had about 120,000 there for it, for the road course race. But I was going to ask you guys, and this is clearly, I don't know if there's any connection here or not, so I was going to ask you guys, has the interest in F1 and the series on Netflix drawn people to say, okay, well, I know I can't go to Monaco. I know I can't go to wherever. Maybe I'm going to start paying attention to Indy a little bit more. It's open wheel racing. It's competitive. Honestly, Indy 500 racing is more competitive than most F1 races. So is that helping draw people into Indy? I don't know.
I honestly don't know because I don't think it's helped NASCAR. That's for sure.
No, I don't think it has.
Now, I understand NASCAR's not open wheel, but
Right.
it definitely has not had significant impacts on NASCAR. And I'd be a little surprised if it had because in the case of the Indy 500, it's oval racing where F1 doesn't do any oval racing. It's all road courses, street courses type thing. So
Maybe it's the Brad Pitt movie.
Yeah,
The F1.
I don't know. And there was this is going to sound like favoritism from my side, but I'm a Kyle Larson fan in NASCAR. His involvement with Indy the last couple of years clearly had an impact. 2 years ago, his first year running, he was second or third in merchandise sales at Indianapolis. Last year, as a one-time driver, he was the number one driver in merchandise sales as a NASCAR guy, just driving the Indy 500. So that's helped bring clearly some attention to it.
Your question, too, gets at an interesting economic issue, and that is this questioner thinks substitutes or complements. Does racing in one circuit help another, or are they pulling away from? I think, traditionally, I think the thinking was, no, we got to run the Coca-Cola 600 so that we don't want our guys running the Indy. Right. I think that's probably wrong-headed. I think, like this year, I was thinking, why in the world, I think we've mentioned this before, why in the world don't you pull off the Indy 500 has a lot of interest, and maybe no other IndyCar race does, but it does. Encouraging guys, hey, we're going to set this up so you can run both. Can only help. Yeah, it may help Indy, but it's going to help you too. This idea that we're always competing. No, racing is competing also with other sports and other entertainment. So that's an issue I think that.
Well, earlier in the year, and I don't know if it was at the urging of Fox, but early in the year, they ran an event at Phoenix International Raceway this year where they had a secondary, what's called the O'Reilly Series NASCAR race on Saturday, an IndyCar race on Saturday at the same event, and then a NASCAR Cup Series race on Sunday. So they combined open wheel and NASCAR at the same weekend at the same track, and it was very successful attendance-wise.
Well, let me bring up something that we keep coming back to. Is continuing the news, the college football playoff. There's a new kid on the block now. This discussion really heating up about a 24-team playoff. The Big Ten, the ACC, Big 12 are all behind this. Notre Dame. The SEC is sort of, we're not too sure about it. In fact, I was reading something yesterday where they're saying we may just go do our own national championship, which would be interesting. What are your thoughts on 2014? What do you think pluses and minuses of? Obviously, teams are, conferences are interested, especially the Big 12s and the ACCs. Hey, we can get another team in.
Look, I'm a college football fan. I'll watch anything they put out there, unfortunately, because I'm just that stupid. But to be honest, if you're doing a playoffs, none of these games matter.
Right.
I mean, it is only for chumps like me who are going to tune in and watch, teams that are ranked around 20 play each other. Like, oh, yeah, that's a lot of fun. But they have no chance of really winning a tournament per se. And so this is just this just seems like spoiled rich guys trying to become even more spoiled rich guys, as it turns out. So they're arguing over how do we beat the cash pinata some way. And okay, that's business. I get that. Is it really add anything to the product? No, you've screwed the product up in a whole bunch of other ways this tournament's not going to solve. The product's messed up from a lot of other different angles. So
now,
the best thing about it is, and we've talked to, I was looking for my soapbox around here. I don't see it, but the proposal is if they go to 24, the conferences have to get rid of the conference championship game. So that's
that might
huge
be
positive.
worth.
But that's the big stick up with the SEC right now. Numbers now are being floated that they make $100 million a year on their conference championship game,
and coaches
they don't want to lose
both
it.
Financially and
Absolutely.
Competitively.
Right.
The coaches were voicing, we love the conference. I'm thinking,
Right.
well, you guys are the only people.
Right.
Well, I should say it does generate interest, and in that, I think, is part of the thing that leads guys like the SEC commissioners say, well, maybe we'll just do our own thing.
Yep, and here's where there's again one of the long list of ways in which the NCAA screwed this thing up so bad is that now the NCAA has no control over any of this stuff, and basically it's the conferences get to decide whether or not they want to cooperate with each other or not cooperate with each other, and there is no guiding force through this. It's really, I mean, individual interest here are in every direction.
It is interesting how, you would think the interests of the SEC and the Big Ten, they would often align because, they both, football is big in both areas, similar sizes. But it seems like on most of these issues, they come down on different proposals. You can see why the ACC and Big 12 would differ from them because they're not on the same level. I mean, there's a brand new proposal by two senators to, basically maybe not turn the back clock to 1975, but, end some of the shifting of players, this, that. But the worst part of it, I thought, was, well, we're going to establish a cap for payments. Well, that's okay if, like Dennis's point over the years, that players have some negotiation in that, or at least someone who represents the players, or there's some fixed percentage of revenue like that mimics professional sports, like 50%. But just turning it over to the schools and the NCAA to say, well, here's the percentage. Well,
I'm perfectly fine with Congress doing this right after they agree that they can no longer trade stocks while they're in office, as it turns out.
Well.
So once they agree to that, then they can start setting pay for other people.
Ball fields, blackboards, and bonds. Is that what we're
Yeah.
Let's go after
the
them.
political side?
one of the things I do in mimicking that, there's been lots of hand wringing about writers about, let's move the basketball tournament to 76. I'm like, 64, 76.
Let them all in at this point. Who
Yeah.
cares?
One thing I do, and I think I've probably expressed this before, but one thing I like about it is having the idea in the basketball is essentially we're going to have a play-in first round to get it to, I don't know, whatever, 64 or something. I see that, and even with the 24, I guess you'd have a play-in to get to 16 before, and so teams have buys, and only the weaker teams. I like that for two reasons. One, to give, if you're going to let these weaker teams in, at least give them a game that they can be competitive. Offering up 16 seeds to 1 seeds in the basketball tournament where they never have a chance to win a game. The other thing is,
Let them play their own conference tournament because that's they have a chance to win those, but nobody wants to watch them
I'm just
either,
taking this as it is.
No, I know, but these are just adding, again, meaningless games that don't really have a chance.
The
of
other
winning.
thing, though, it does too is that the teams that come out of that first round at least have shown they can beat somebody. Because one of the things, 2 seeds occasionally get beat, 3 seeds get beat some. 1 seeds, there's one time in history that's because you're pitting the best team against the very worst teams. Well, at least now it might not be a very good team, but it won't be the worst. But that's the trouble too with the expanding the football, because the problem you see in basketball will be even worse in football, because in basketball a team shoots out of their head one night, or one team has really bad shooting night, you can get a 2 beating a 15. The third team from the Big 12 that gets in the tournament, or Northern Illinois from the mid-major, they're not ever competing. They're going to Michigan or Ohio State or Alabama. They're never not only winning, that game will never be competitive. And that's the thing nobody seems to ever bring up at this.
I completely agree, and I will completely tune in and watch.
Yes.
But to your point, in the past, going to 24, if they do, the first 8 teams get a bye. So you got the bottom 16 are going to play to get to the final 16, whatever. You're going to have 8 games there. If they do this, in my opinion, and I think your opinion, the correct way, those 8 games will be on the campuses. So if you're the 9 seed, you host 24.
Well, 4 games, wouldn't it? If you have 8 teams out of the 24, you're trying to get down.
Then you'd have 9 through 24, 10 through...
Oh, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, I think it'd be 8 games.
Yeah.
But if those have a chance to be hosted on campus, what I don't want to see here is we play those first 8 games, and all of a sudden one becomes the Music City Bowl, one becomes the Holiday Bowl, and whatever. And all of a sudden, and I think that's the route they're going. I think they're trying to expand this so that those first round games are now going to be all across the country's different bowl games, which again ruins the interest in me. You're taking away the benefit of a home game for a lot of schools that would never be in the playoffs, yes, but you're taking away the benefit to play a home game.
All right, let's. I want to talk a little bit. We've Dennis has brought this up a couple of times, or the impending MLB labor conflict at the end of this season. There was a kind of a well-written deep dive athletic article on kind of the economics of what seems to really be the issue here. And so what they were honing in on was the difference in franchise values as a multiple of revenue in, say, the NFL or the NBA versus Major League Baseball. And so you look at these numbers, NFL, NBA, the franchise values run 10 to 12 times higher than annual revenue, whereas for MLB, it's more like 6. And so MLB owners are saying, well, the reason for that is these leagues have a hard salary cap. Now, NHL also has a hard salary cap. Historically, their multiples have been a little less than MLB's, their franchise multiples. They've risen to about, but one of the questions is, why is NHL's, why isn't it 12? But another question is, how in the world are the NBA multiples as high as they are? It's a...
Yeah, asking me anything about the NBA is a big mistake. I got nothing for you.
You haven't prepared your speech on how NBA is more valuable than NHL and MLB and NFL.
I know it is. Do I understand why? Nope. I'm a sports fan.
I mean, one of the things...
I couldn't even tell you what's going on in the NBA.
One of the things that affects revenue, but I don't know why it would affect this franchise multiple, is national TV contracts. And so the NFL and NBA have more of a national TV presence than MLB does, much more regionalized interest. But again, that should just affect revenue, I would think. So I guess another question would be, is there something other than salary cap coming at this angle that's affecting these multiples other than, I mean, one of the things you do see is in the NFL and NBA, there is a variation. Smaller market teams, their multiple isn't as high as the big market teams.
So that was going to be my big question here: is how do those multiples vary across the franchises within Major League Baseball? And is it the case that it's pulled down because there is such a variation in what would be considered large and small market teams in Major League Baseball? And because that variance is so large, what you get is the small market teams have really small multiples that pull down the average a lot. And I don't know that that's the case, but that would be my guess here is even though we're talking about the same size cities, what's considered a large market and small market is their willingness and ability to spend money on players, to be competitive, to be a real interest. I mean, Green Bay is a tiny, tiny town relative to everybody else, but they can be on equal footing in the NFL.
Well, part of that, too, is because when you play once a week, they're really not the Green Bay Packers. They're the Wisconsin Packers. And so you have a bigger... But it gets at the point you're raising is what's the mark? What's the relevant market size?
Yeah, in their case, though, the revenue generation is so much from the national broadcasting contract instead of being local, where Major League Baseball, the NHL, even the NBA are much more locally generated. And then the number of games in which you play, then you are much more of your own local market. And so the smaller market then really, really matters.
Right.
I still think the big problem Major League Baseball has is, again, the competing interests. And I'm not sure that they have of the owners, the competing interest of the owners. If it's the case that these multiples are really big, and I would guess that they are, big variance between them, and I would guess that they are, what you're going to have is all these small market teams are arguing for one thing that they want done in these negotiations, and these large market teams are arguing for something different. And so what you need then is a very strong commissioner who can corral all of those opinions and get them going. And do we think Manfred is a really strong commissioner? I would sure like to hear Chris Biolsi's take on this and everything, because I know where he would come down on this. But I don't think they have that at all. And therefore, these competing interests amongst owners, and if you've ever, any of these, every room these owners are in, they're the smartest person in the room. So these competing interests, I don't think they have any idea what they're going to negotiate for.
Yeah, you bring, I think, a very relevant point up, this difference in market size coupled with the difference in the national interest. And so you just never get, where there's a big national TV contract leads to somewhat more cohesion among the owners. Where your revenue is much more locally or regionally driven, you're not going to get the same degree of cohesion. Now, one of the pushbacks by the Players Association has been to say, well, look, the Padres are going through a sale. It's going to sell for $4 billion. Their multiple is going to be more like 8, which you're talking about a small to medium market in San Diego, said, why is that? And their answer is, well, because they actually spent money over the last few years to have a better on-field product. And now, again, one could look at these multiples. Now, one of the difficulties here is these multiples, many of them, most of these are Forbes estimates. You seldom actually get sales where you actually get arm's length, a real market valuation. But these Forbes estimates, I think, often, again, they try to build them, I think, off of past sales. And so they're not outrageously.
I think they're almost consistently underestimated, but they are consistent.
Right.
So they're consistent in how they're doing their estimation. But I think they're almost consistently underestimated. Like sales almost always go for bigger than whatever Forbes suggests their value are.
Now, the weird thing is, the Padres are going to go for more than the Mets went for just 4 years ago. It's those kinds of things are head scratching. Then the next question kind of addressed in this piece, which I think is a relevant question. Well, how far are the owners willing to go? Are in order, because you're running this risk, yes, you gain long term by a salary cap, but you also can lose revenue because you push fans away for the next 2, 3, 4 years if you miss half a season or a whole season or whatever. And so that, again, but I think this comes back to your owner cohesion and how well guys are willing to stick together. Obviously, the Yankees, they're not interested in not playing. Their multiple is up there right around what the NFL and NBA multiples are. And so, those kinds of teams are like, why would we? And so, I think this regionalization of demand, feeds in a couple of ways into what may turn into baseball has a history of kind of labor disputes that lead to
I think that's the
missed
biggest.
games.
Clearly, the biggest risk for the owners is financially, but the risk for them is they've set the table for a salary cap. They've set the table that we're going to have
Manfred's had been out there
We've set the
selling
table
it.
that this is going to be implemented. But history shows, you can go back and read, history shows the owners break before the players do almost every time in Major League Baseball. So what happens when they've convinced the Reds fans and A's fans and whoever's fans that we're going to have a salary cap, it's going to help your team, you're going to be more competitive, and then halfway through the season, the owners cave and say, okay, we can't get through this. Well, we lost half the season and we're still with no salary cap. The owners have an unbelievable, and the players do too, but the owners have an unbelievable risk on their hands of we're going to lose this battle financially and we're going to lose the public relations battle with the fans who want to see it.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, in the fact that the owners will tend to favor their own short-term profits over long-run profits, or maybe holding out might be for the league more long-run profitable, but they are being profitable right now. And Major League Baseball franchises across the board are all making money now.
That's not what they say.
Well, but that was
we
definitely relative to what it was, say, even 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago. They're definitely doing financially much better than they were.
Right.
And now once you start missing paychecks, now it's, okay, who wants to hold out the longest when you're missing paychecks? And I think the owners being more profitable of recent means they're less likely to hold out as long as the players. Now, I don't know that will be the case. It's been the case in the past. But if you're losing money, and again, you have some stockpile, maybe you're willing to hold out for the long run benefit. I don't know that they're willing to do that. But again, even the players don't know exactly what they're arguing for either.
Right,
now they've got
right.
the have and have nots in the player side of this. So,
Well, their original proposal was yesterday. They made a proposal yesterday.
oh, I didn't see this.
Yeah, and it was a salary floor, no salary cap, but a salary floor, doubling the minimum wage, the minimum salary.
So the all dealing
doubling within the next year, and then by whatever 2030, tripling the minimum salary from I think it's $760 now to $1.5 million next year to 2.6 whatever.
This is what the players were
This was the
proposing?
players.
So what did they give up?
Nothing. They didn't. They're not. But as they said, this is where you start negotiations. This is where
Yeah,
you
that's
start.
true.
So
Now, one of the things, and this often doesn't get brought up, but one of the negotiating things for the owner side could be, we talk about salary cap, and in other leagues, it tends to be around 50%, 51, 52%, but that percentage, obviously there's some percentage at which the player, well, if you all get 90%, the players would be like, well, sure, we'll take a salary cap. So, if you inch that up some to, okay, well, we'll go 54%, you might be able to, there's some point where there would be some meeting of the minds. But again, I don't see that discussed much.
I mean, I don't have a rooting interest in how I hope this plays out type thing, other than they got to do something about the Shohei Ohtani
yes,
contracts.
yes,
Like these
yes.
deferred payments that,
Yes.
that's okay. Again, I can understand there's some reasons to do it, but the real reason is just to get around any type of collectively bargained, implemented thing that you had. And okay, that's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Around it, I think
because
it's wrong.
again, that does also tend to play into the hands of the very well-to-do franchises. Because, when you're as wealthy as, say, the Dodgers, or the Mets, you're, I think, willing to take more risk. It's because it's not as big of a risk to you as it would be. The Brewers or the Royals of the world aren't going to put that amount of deferred salary 10 years down the road.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that the side points in this piece is the role of private equity. Now, no private equity controls enough of a team to make the decisions, but as this money is beginning to flow in, I mean, these are investments. These aren't trophy assets. These people are interested in making money. Now, again, they can't on their own determine strategy. It is interesting. I've forgotten that the Braves are actually a publicly traded entity, so we do have a market valuation of them, and so we do know their multiple. The other thing that comes up, revenue, as we've said through the years on our podcast, revenue is much more of a hard figure than profits. There have been many studies over the years that in sports, there are a lot of ways to make profits disappear, but revenue, it's, that's a more of a figure that, because player associations can ask for audits. And so, but I've wondered, is there some difference in revenue? I mean, partly what's started happening, some of these places, and the Braves have done this, other places, even colleges starting to do this, build out these entertainment areas around the stadiums. I've wondered how much that differs across sports or teams and franchise values, but there's your next research topic. Let me go into bring on Eagles here for a minute, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, Wall Street Journal had a piece on the worst kept secret in the NFL is A.J. Brown being traded after June 1. That Howie Roseman, the GM for the Eagles, when asked about it, it's like asking somebody about some secret negotiation. You can tell he's dancing around the topic. It is interesting that here's a guy who is clearly, when he's on the field, one of the best receivers in the NFL, but the Titans were willing to get rid of him. The Eagles were willing to get rid of him. But there's always somebody, the Patriots are supposedly at the lead of the teams. There's also always somebody willing to take a player like that on. So one, why are teams wanting to unload a guy like him? And then second, then why would other teams be willing to spend to get a guy like that? And so the undercurrent question is, how important is it and this I think differs across sports. How important is it to avoid the troublemaker player?
I think.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think you kind of answered your question when you ask it, why do teams do this? Because it's always a short-term investment of there's always going to be somebody else who will take him off my hands if he doesn't work for me. So if I'm whoever, the Jets at this point, and I trade for him and I have him for a year and a half and he's great for the first year, and then the first half of the second year he's with us, he's terrible, he's causing locker room issues, somebody else is going to take him off my hands. I just see this as such a short-term approach from most GMs. Okay, he might cause a problem in the locker room, but we've got 50 whatever guys in the locker room. I'm not worried about one guy being able to poison the whole team.
It is interesting, though. These are always one of two positions, right? It's not generally across the field. And you could have locker room problems from a guy who's an offensive guard. I mean, right, he can be the biggest problem in the locker room, but they'll get rid of that guy, or nobody even thinks twice about it. But being elite wide receivers or defensive backs, when these guys are problems, again, talent covers up a whole other host of issues with them, and others are willing to take a chance. Now, again, in some cases, this worked out really well. I mean, Randy Moss, whenever he moves over to the New England Patriots,
For 2 seasons,
yeah,
he's
it worked
a
out
good
great.
citizen, right?
But in essence, it was known that if you come here and don't fit in, we're getting rid of you.
And once he quit fitting in,
They
got rid of him.
Yeah. And so if you have that type of discipline in ownership, coaching, structure, that, hey, if you come and fit in, fine, your talents can work here. As soon as you don't fit in, we're sending you packing. But that's really tough. I mean, same time period or around that same as Terrell Owens in Philadelphia. I mean, that goes really well and then
San Francisco,
backfires. Yeah.
right.
You can expand it to the NBA. Dennis Rodman was a complete head case, and Jordan said, "Okay, we're bringing him in, but I'm controlling how he behaves, and if he is in accordance with what Scottie Pippen and I want, we'll keep him. As soon as
Scottie
we don't,
Pippen didn't want him.
right, he's gone." And the Spurs did this. They brought him in later in the career, but the Spurs brought in Steven Jackson as well, who'd been a complete disappointment in Indiana with the Pacers. And Duncan said, we'll bring him in, and once he becomes a problem for us, we'll get rid of him. Well, I think he won a title with San Antonio, and it happened there too.
I think that is the key. If you're willing to say this is the condition on which you're here, and once you don't meet those conditions, this is over. The problem situations are where the guy becomes a problem, and they keep letting it percolate, because then, and I think that is where it is interesting. I think in a sport like football, a wide receiver who starts yelling at the quarterback, I think offensive linemen start going, what's this guy's deal?
Yeah.
It is a bit different. Look, Jeff Kemp and Barry Bonds could be slugging it out of the dugout, but if they would go up and hit and do their job in the field, the Giants sort of still make it playoffs. But that, I think, in some sports, hockey is one, football, team cohesion does matter more. Because it's very team-oriented sports.
I know the hockey thing at least
Yeah.
minimally well. And the fact that I've been told that if you have a strong locker room, you can have a problem child come in there, and the locker room will take care of most of those issues. And whatever issues still remain are not insurmountable. But there is a quick tipping point that if it's one and he gets a sympathetic ear and they become buddies, and now you got multiple problems, well, now you can start losing the locker room, and now you got to move people and get them out of there ASAP type thing.
Well, this is why I was pleased. You were, in one of our recent podcasts, Dennis was kind of laughing that the Cowboys, latching on to George Pickens, and that I've been pleased that they just, and to franchise tag 1-year deal. Look, even beyond that, the trouble is with Pickens and CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott. If they were to sign him to a longer term deal, you got a ton of your salary cap tied up in 3 players, and you become Cincinnati. Can you really afford 2 number 1 receivers when you're paying your quarterback $60 million a year?
Well, they just moved a defensive end to Green Bay to avoid that
right, exactly.
same situation. Right?
So I thought their move to say, well, whether they're doing this to test him out for a year or just saying, well, look, we'll do a 1-year deal where we're paying this amount. I thought, hey, that's a much smarter thing to do than let's sign George Pickens to a 5-year deal. That's
the problem with that. The franchise tag thing is the amount you have to pay for those franchise tags are really high.
Right.
So that takes up a big portion of your cap for this year.
Right. One of the things I didn't have this on the agenda for today. I remembered over the last couple of years, we've talked about Live Golf, and now that it has pretty much imploded. I mean, they're still playing, but it's on its last legs in terms of being any kind of real viable entity. It's a real interesting case because if you went back, whatever it was, 2 or 3 years ago, when John Rahm made the switch, I think that was their peak of their leverage. That the world number 1 or number 2 going after, they had a list of number 1, number 2s and major winners, and that was a big move. And then the PGA Tour said, okay, we'll make a joint agreement. And we never knew all the details of negotiations, but one could surmise that what Liv was pushing for was, instead of we want 2 or 3 tournaments a year, we want something close to equal footing, which the PGA Tour got an infusion of money. And and it was interesting how quickly Liv's leverage dissipated. That the PGA Tour, when they kind of had a year there where we're trying to work out an agreement. By the end of that first year where they hadn't, all of a sudden now it began to be clear, wait a minute, the PGA Tour seems to now have the upper hand. Live, even though they've signed this TV deal, they're not getting viewership. But one of the things that Dennis alluded to this last time, or Craig, talked about, we were talking about even guys who watch golf a lot like us weren't watching Live. Yeah, Craig and me. But I think Dennis referred to habits, and I refer to that some. In economics, the fancy term that we sometimes use is consumption capital. We think about capital, building investments and things. You build buildings, you have equipment, but consumers also build up skills in consuming. It's an interesting thing. I think it's sports. It is really the case, and you can elaborate on this if you want, Dennis. That
I have nothing to add here with the Live Golf portion of this.
No. Well, but the Live thing, I think.
You guys call this brand loyalty, by the way.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was curious. Don't consuming consumption. That's just buying things, as far as I'm concerned, on the marketing side.
But I think even though in one way part of that is the name brand of the players, but some of it is. Like for me, it was, I know the PGA Tour schedule, and I know, all right, here's when the Masters is coming, here's when Bay Hill is, here's when Kapalua is, and I know here's the setup of the tournament. Well, all of those things kind of map into my viewership. It's not just that this thing exists, but it exists in a format that I'm used to, and and so again, whether you call it habit or loyalty or consumption capital, I think, again, I guess whether it's Live or beyond, it got me thinking that in sports, people really do build up a lot of consumption capital, just like they do. I think the most similar thing outside of sports would be things like Star Wars or Star Trek movie franchises, that people are like, wait a minute, that movie wasn't enough like the old series. Like, well, if people that are not as deep into it, like, so what? But to those people, that's a big deal.
It's me. So if you want to do Star Wars talk,
No, I'm waiting for you guys to do the live portion of this and everything.
I have nothing on that.
Yeah. Look, I think you're right here in the fact that that's part of being. Why are people sports fans? I mean, it's one thing if you watch sports and everything, but people literally, in some way, emotionally invest themselves. Now, I might not be the scream at your TV type of person, but I get emotionally invested in, say, the Stanley Cup playoffs and the fact that I'm watching the Stanley Cup playoffs soup to nuts. I'm watching the whole thing and watching almost every game of it, or at least a portion of every game. And so I'm vested in hockey at this point.
Well, college football.
Yeah, and same thing. I would do that in college football season. And even the things I don't like about them, I'm willing to overlook in the fact that, hey, I'm vested. I'm kind of into this. Now, that doesn't make me a very good economist because we have this thing of sunk costs not being part of your decision-making process, and I can't ever get around those type of things. But that being said, that is part of being a fan, right? That's kind of the emotional connection that you get in sports. And it's why series like, again, it doesn't matter if it's Star Wars or Star Trek or Harry Potter or whatever.
Or some Netflix.
Yeah, any type of series, people get invested in that type of thing. There's a book series that I'm reading right now. I can't wait for the 7th book in this to come out. I'm like, come on, let's go. I mean, because of I'm invested in the series type thing. So that's part of being a fan. Now, the problem then, things like Live Golf, or I'll even say the Spring Football League has, is, okay, well, now you have to break people's interest in what they were doing and get interested in what I'm doing. That's not easy to do. And Liv tried to do it by buying all these really good players. Doesn't seem like it worked out. But again, I don't know enough about the Liv PGA back and forth. But it is interesting. It's some of the football that's being played in the spring from this UFL, or I think that's what it's called, is pretty creative and innovative and really good. And if you're a football fan kind of watching this, you're going to see some of the things that they do in this UFL happen on Sunday in the fall. But viewership is almost non-existent. People just aren't that interested because it's not part of their habits, their consumption pattern, their brand loyalty, however we want to call it.
Well, I think that's been a big issue with Liv. The team concept of Liv never caught on. And the team concept, I think, was built from the fact of, well, we see how the team concept works in the Ryder Cup and it works in the President's Cup and the Solheim Cup. But people weren't tuning in every week to see the team concept. And to me, that's where the biggest issue they have going forward. They're looking for, I think, $250 or whatever, $300 million as an investment to keep them afloat for the next few years. But their goal is to get investments in each of those individual teams that they have. And I just don't see the team concept of golf being sellable to people who want to invest in it.
Golf fans, in terms of team, it's the Ryder Cup and President's Cup. Other than that, people could care less about the team.
But that's not even a team thing. That's a nationality.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Nationalistic pride at that point. It's not like, Denver's playing, Seattle in golf. Like nobody would know what that means.
For me, the whole team thing in Liv, it was distracting.
Exactly. I was getting ready to say the exact same thing. I watched some of the Liv Golf. I'm a Mickelson fan, so I've watched Liv Golf. I like Koepka, DeChambeau, those guys. But I spent so much time watching the rundown. Golf is good about showing who's in the lead and the top 10 or 12 guys. But Liv spent half of their TV time listing the team rankings and where the teams were. I had no idea where Mickelson was. But
I didn't know who was on which team.
Exactly. And again, that's why I say the focus on that seems to be, and maybe that's why the PGA deal fell through. There might have been Liv holding on to this idea, we have to have some of this team concept, and the PGA said that's not what people want to see. I don't know that. But as a golf fan, I could see the PGA saying, there's no reason to do this team thing. It does not make sense.
The last thing I want to bring up, there was kind of an interesting piece on ESPN about NBA draft picks. And, I kind of been an impression over the years, and I think this probably has changed, that, if you get to pick in the top 5, you get to pick somebody who's going to be a franchise maker. You get Akeem Olajuwon, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. Well, if you look at the data from over the last 20, 25 years, picking the top 5 for at least the teams that originally picked these guys is not the path to success. One guy out of 5 will have real playoff success. Another guy will have marginal. The other 3 will have hardly any playoff success. And I was thinking, one, that kind of overturned my expectations. But the more I thought about it, I thought, well, that kind of makes sense as you've moved toward this world of one and done and international players, that back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, well, right, Michael Jordan had 3 years, or Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, all these guys. I don't know, I'm stuck in the 80s and guys I watched a lot. But you knew a lot. Okay, yeah, there'd be a Sam Bowie whose feet don't hold up. But that was the exception, not the rule. But you had a lot of information about these guys. The one and done guys, there's not, guys are still really developing. The SGA guy, I never can say his full name, from Oak City. Well, again, guys like that have developed a lot more post 19-year-old. By the time guys were 21, you had a lot more information about them. But did you guys find that kind of, well, I'm hemming and hawing here, but did you find that to be different than what you expected? That
Not what I expected because of what you're saying. When it shifted to the international approach and the younger draft approach, where you've got guys who've played 1 year in college, maybe 2, to me that makes it extremely hard to predict what these guys are going to be 5 years down the road. And you draft these guys and you have them on a rookie contract, and getting into the contracts of the NBA is minutia, but a lot of the rookies either on a 3-year or 4-year contract, depending on a lot of things. But if you've had that guy for 3 years, you drafted him at 19, by the time he's 22, he's still a good player, but he's not a great player. Are you going to commit on the open market $20 million for 5 years to that guy, or $120 million for 5 years? That becomes a significant investment. Or in the middle of his 3rd year, am I going to start doing the Major League Baseball approach and say, you know what, I'm trading him for another first-round pick. Somebody's going to want him. Maybe they can develop him. I'll take a risk on going back into the draft and finding somebody else. I just think it's because those guys are so young, and the international guys are even worse because you don't know. For years, I always laughed at the old Bill Simmons comment, this guy can post up a chair. Well, that was what he was doing in his videos from Europe or whatever it was. There was very little video on those guys, so you didn't know what you were getting. So it's not surprising to me, just because we've gone so young, and the NBA has gone so young in terms of their draft.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's led to the curse of early picks, right? Because now you're locked into what you have to pay them salary-wise, because the draft picks are associated with fixed contracts.
Right.
And you're running a greater risk. So your returns off of a higher contract are much smaller and more risky than they've ever been. It turns out that drafting in the top 4, 5, 6, whatever draft picks is actually now much more of a curse than it is a benefit.
Which is
unless you end up with any elite. If you end up with a Kobe Bryant, which Kobe Bryant wasn't drafted in the top 5 or 6. So, but if you end up with a LeBron, okay, I understand. But that doesn't come around, as it turns out, right? So,
but this is the irony, and they mentioned this in the piece, of all of tanking becoming, even though the return seems to be so uncertain, everybody's, in fact, now the NBA has adopted some policies to really try to address what had become an epidemic. And this year was to a level never seen before. You have 15 teams, not just 2 or 3, but 15 teams tanking.
I'm not sure that the best strategy from a management standpoint, a general manager type standpoint in the NBA, is to avoid the draft almost at all cost. Like I'll trade this as a value to somebody else who thinks it has value because it's of greater risk. I'll go sign people or trade for people who have known value, and I can negotiate what their contract might be. I think that might be more certainty, a more certain return than draft picks are.
It's an interesting idea. In some ways, it's similar to thinking a part of some NFL executives. Hey, people are so clamoring for some top 10. I'll trade. They'll give me 2 good picks for 1 top 10 pick. And ultimately in the NFL, bodies matter, and especially when you don't know which bodies are going to really turn out. All right. Well, that'll do us for this month. Thanks for listening and tuning in. We'll be back next month.